Reactionary.net, here to help you learn about React.js. Everyone from experts to novices, we're here to help you develop your knowledge. Let Zac Braddy show you how to learn the ins and outs of React now.
Hi there web devs, Zac Braddy here from the Reactionary.net, where we're learning the ins and outs of the React.js library together. Welcome back to the Code Venturing tutorial series. This week we're going to be taking on the dark arts of JSX. Now if you've spent even a little bit of time studying React at all, if you've seen any articles, if you've just seen some code floating about, you will have seen JSX. It's that XML markup sort of thing that's in the middle of the JavaScript, gets you right in the separations of concerns. And you may not have liked the look of it, but in this video I'm going to hope to be able to show you the reasons why it's actually not that bad. And in actual fact, not just not that bad, it's actually a really good thing. So let's not do too much talking about it. Let's just hop straight in, and we'll have a look at how we're going to refactor the application that we built in the previous two tutorials, which I'll put a link for right here. So if you haven't watched the earlier tutorials, then you might want to go back and have a quick look at them first and see how they go. Or if you don't really have the time to look at the other tutorials, then I'm going to put a link for the GitHub right here for all the code for the tutorial series, and you can go ahead and pull that repo down and then look at the branch you'll need to grab the part 2 branch for today. So here we are, code venturers, taking our first dangerous steps into JSX. What we've got here is the CodeQuest GitHub repository that as I said earlier, I've pulled this down. I expect that you should probably do this as well. The link for the GitHub repo, if you've already missed it, is going to be in the description below. So if you missed it before, you can click on it and grab it now. This in particular is the part 2 branch. So this is all the code up until the end of the second tutorial. So we've got our Webpack pipeline put in, and the basis of the CodeQuest application that we've got. So just in case you missed the earlier tutorials, let's just quickly run the application here. Might have to skip this because it's taking a little bit too long. So part of the reason why it was taking so long was because I didn't have any of the modules installed. I've just recently, as I say, pulled down this branch. So one thing that you'll need to remember to do when you pull down this branch is go into your terminal here, in this case a Windows command prompt for me, and just do an npm install or npm I, so that we can pull down all the packages that the Webpack pipeline needs. So that'll take a moment. I may take this time to skip again. And with all those packages installed, we're ready to go ahead and run our pipeline now that we have all the dependencies that we needed. Now, it occurred to me earlier, you may have noticed that I just double-click start here in my WebStorm instance. Now, this is actually a WebStorm feature whereby it grabs the package.json and pulls out all the tasks and gives you a handy-dandy menu to run all your tasks from. Now, in all likelihood, well, you may not have WebStorm, so if you don't, then you can go ahead and use the command line in the same way as what I've shown you in the previous tutorials, and you can just use npm start, and that will run our application, and that has opened up on the other screen here, and you'll see the application that we built in the previous tutorials. So now we're ready to dig into this tutorial. So let's get you eased into this tutorial, right? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of renaming, refactoring sort of thing. Now, with the CodeQuest.jsx, we're going to turn, or JS at the moment, soon to be JSX. That is a React component, and we're going to put JSX in it. Now, you don't have to do this step, but I find that it's a nice little convention in that what I do is I rename that file to CodeQuest.jsx. Now, I'll go ahead and do that refactor. Now, WebStorm has a feature whereby when you do renaming, it goes through and renames all the instances of the file that you're using throughout the project. So let me just take a quick look. Now, you can see here that we haven't actually included .js on the end of the CodeQuest require here, because the common JS standard doesn't actually require you to put JS on the end of JavaScript files in that way. So there shouldn't be any problems there, provided when we look in the Webpack here, you can see that within Webpack we have some of these loaders, and the test here is some regex that runs over the file names of all the files in your beginning from your root solution here, and beginning from your entry point is what I was saying, and it tests for this .js to see if it needs to go into the Babel loader, which is obviously where all our JavaScript goes into. So it's going to be important for us, if we're going to change the extension of our React component, that we include in this regex .jsx as well, so that our JSX so now we're saying look for .js or .jsx, just to make sure that that's definitely going to go through. One other thing that is kind of a convention that you'll find as you go through learning more about React is that components generally start with a capital letter. So you'll find a lot of people will prefer that, whereby you've got a capital C CodeQuest. And now, just for completeness, I'll add a capital letter there as well so everyone knows what I'm talking about. And I've saved that down. There's one more thing that I need to show you. So within Webpack, we have to configure the resolve for the CommonJS within Webpack, or the CommonJS implementation within Webpack. So you remember I was saying that in this require within the index.js, that there was no need to put the JSX or the JS on the end, because part of the CommonJS specification says that you don't need to do that. Now, the CommonJS specification, by default, says that you don't need to put on JS or JSON. There's one other one that I specified in the .node, and we're now saying that we don't want to have to include .jsx. So, that's not part of the CommonJS specification, and so by default Webpack's not going to sort of allow us to do that, which means that require is not actually valid anymore now that we're wanting to include JSX as well. So what we'll need to do is add a resolve key, and within the resolve key, the value of it will be an object, and one of the properties of that object is going to be extensions. And we're going to say, when you're resolving requires, look for modules. It's okay to have modules that have no extension. It's okay to have them with .js and also .jsx. Well, when I say it's okay, what I mean is that when a require comes along, or when Webpack tries to resolve a require, and it finds that there's no extension on that require, what it's going to do first is just leave it as is and see if it can find a package in the node modules folder. And if it can't find one, then it'll whack a .js on the end of it and say, well, have I got any files nearby that match that path? And then after that, it'll say, okay, well, what about JSX files? And so that's the magic that we're trying to add on here. And whilst I'm looking at this as well, this regex here it probably isn't the best way to do this regex, because we're doubling up that the start of that with the dot. We didn't have to do the /dot twice in front of each of these JS and JSX in the test. That looks a bit nicer. So now we've gotten to the end of all the refactoring and renaming and stuff, and now we can move on. So Webpack's going to need a little bit more help here. So we've got the JSX in there now, but Babel as it stands is only able to transpile ES6. So it needs a plugin to be able to help it to transpile the JSX that we're about to give it. So let's go ahead and I've got the project running here, so what I might do is I'll just cancel out of that. We need to install the, I need to remember the exact name here because it's quite long. We're installing Babel plugin transform JSX, and we're going to install that to the dev dependencies. I think that this may well win some prizes for the most explicitly named npm package in the whole of the library. So now we've got Babel plugin transform JSX in there, so we should be able to now tell Babel, hey, use this plugin, and it will help you to be able to transpile JSX. So to be able to do that, we need to add a key to the query object underneath the loader that's the Babel loader, and we use plugins is the property that we want to add, and that will take an array, and within that array we will give it transform React.js. And rather than a hash, it's better to use an apostrophe when you want to quote something. And there we go. So that should now be enough for us to be able to use JSX within our application. One thing that I did do in the tutorial, which I'll follow on from in here as well, I say the tutorial, I mean the blog post version of the tutorial, is I split this configuration out of the webpack.config.js simply to separate the concerns a little bit. So as you move on, as you start building a larger application, then you may start finding that you need to put more and more configuration in for Babel, and it's nice to not have that pollute your Webpack configuration, because these things can get complicated enough. You can see that this is already 40 lines long and we're just creating a scroll. So in order for us to be able to separate out that configuration, we'll make a new file in our, we won't do it in the source folder though, we'll do it in the root directory of our application, and we'll call it .babelrc. Now, woe is you if you're on a Windows machine and you don't have something similar to WebStorm. You might want to get, I don't know, Notepad++ or something like that, something that's able to put a dot at the start of your files. But assuming that you've already been able to solve that problem, we will grab the settings here. I'm going to just Control X that, and I'll get rid of the query parameter altogether, and then I'll save that, and I will go into the Babel RC. Now this Babel RC is actually going to be a JSON file, so we just need to put in the things that we need in order for this to be JSON ready. Just replace all these single quotes with double quotes. Looks like it's helpfully added a bracket for me there, which I didn't need. Make some double quotes here and here. Get rid of the comma dangle, and that should be enough. Okay, hold on to your hats or do whatever you need to do to brace yourself, because we're just about to put in our first JSX code snippet here. So just like in the blog post tutorial, we're going to do this like a band-aid straight on, and I'm just going to put the whole code in, and then we're going to analyze it sort of step by step here. So just let me grab the snippet of code here off the post. And then I'm just going to copy it straight over the top of this render function. And there we go. Now you'll notice that I don't have any linting or linting hints here, having copied all of this seemingly HTML markup into my JavaScript file, and that is because I've done that renaming earlier with the .jsx, and that's part of the reason why I like doing the JSX thing as well, is because for me, then using WebStorm, the linter kicks in, and I'm able to start linting these files correctly. Now I'm pretty confident that other editors do this as well with like Atom and I'm not sure about VS Code. I'll need to look that up. But anyway, that's the snippet. There's one further thing that we need to do, and that is also put some JSX into our React DOM render down here. So we'll just paste that in there now. Now, all things being fair and equal, that should now be enough change for us to be able to run the application again. So I'll run that npm start. And I got an error here. What have I got? Cannot resolve directory. So this suggests to me that I have not done the Webpack resolve here correctly. So let me wipe and fix this. I'm going to wipe, and we'll wipe back in. Now, of course, you're never going to believe me now, but I did actually suspect that this was the problem. And the problem is that our resolves weren't working correctly in the Webpack and in our Webpack config. So if you take a look at the output of the, you can see here's our Webpack dev server error report here. You can see that it says cannot resolve file or directory. I mean, resolve's the key word here. That's the thing that's tipping you off. But you can see, remember how I was saying earlier about the CommonJS specification, looking at a whole heap of different extensions when it doesn't have an extension in the require. And you can see Webpack trying that here. The reason why I haven't cut all this out is because I kind of think this is interesting to present to you. So look, it's found that CodeQuest was not, it's not here. So it's checked CodeQuest, it's checked CodeQuest.webpack.js, it's tried .js, it's tried JSON, it's tried web.js, but it hasn't tried JSX, and that's the problem. And the reason for that is, have a look at where our resolve is. It's sitting in the modules object, and it needs to be its own key here. So if we move this down so that it's on the root of the config object instead, then what you should find is that when we start it again, now it works. Now it was able to resolve the .jsx extension. And so here's our file, all JSX'd up. You can see that there is JavaScript, and yes, it appears that there is HTML in amongst all that JavaScript. And that is one of the things that really grinds against a lot of people when they first see JSX being used to implement React. So the goal for me for the rest of this tutorial is to try and ease that grinding on you a little bit and just show you that really what we're looking at here is not really as much of an anti-pattern as you think it is. In fact, I don't think it's an anti-pattern at all. I think it's actually something that can unlock a really powerful potential to increase the readability of your code. But first, let's have a look at what this actually means and what it's doing. So I think one of the better ways to understand that is just to have a look at a div. So I've got one up here now. So on the left is the JSX version of the component, and on the right is, well, the component before we introduced JSX. So let's just quickly go through this line by line here. So you can see here in the render function, the first line is a create React element div. Now this is the root element of the component that's going to be returned via the render function. And you can see here that we've got a root div on the side here, but I mean this one takes what, 5 characters, and this one takes significantly more characters. And that, I mean, that's obviously not going to get sent down to, I mean, this div here isn't going to translate directly into JavaScript, so the characters aren't necessarily important in terms of performance and so forth, but certainly readability, that it factors in quite a bit. This is kind of one of the gotchas of using JSX. When you first go into JSX, it would seem that, you know, just adding another div underneath here and, you know, putting the brackets around it and returning that, what's the big deal? Well, it's a lot easier to understand what the big deal is when you look at the right hand side here, and you can see that we're returning the result of a call to the create element function on the React global variable. So yeah, that's one thing you have to be mindful of when you start using JSX. But moving on down here, you can see the next one is create element input, and we've got our props. Now that translates directly to what looks like an input tag with some attributes assigned to it, and these are our props. These are the things that get passed down. So moving down, we've got the div, and we've got another div here, and the class name is the prop that we're passing in, and that goes down. And you can see here that the next line is a div, and you saw that we've got a couple of different children here. It was hello and then this.state.name. And in the JSX version, we've got hello, and in curly braces, we've got this.state.name. The curly braces, it gives you the ability to be able to revert back to just using plain old JavaScript within your JSX. So this has allowed us to input the JavaScript value of this.state.name into the string that will live within this div. And to show you a little bit further, I mean, you know, the how we go about putting that plain JavaScript into the string that gets returned, you can see I'm feeding in a carriage return and line feed into the middle of this. I'd like to invite you on a wondrous adventure, so forth. And that will then allow us. I'm pretty sure we didn't have that previously. Yeah, so that was just a little bit of a housekeeping thing, just to make it look a little bit nicer. But rather than putting in what I would have had to have put in the Unicode characters here, instead I've used just the JavaScript. I put it between quotes and use the JavaScript carriage return and line feed to make that a little bit easier to read. And the last thing that you'll notice is that rather than using React.createElement and then passing in our CodeQuest variable here, or a CodeQuest, I guess it's the React class at this point, we just pass in CodeQuest as a tag, as if it was a HTML tag. And with JSX, you can do that, and so all your components then become sort of, I mean, it appears as if they become their own custom tags within your JSX, and that helps a lot with readability and therefore maintainability as well. Now at this point you may be thinking to yourself, well, yeah, Zach, it's all well and good that all those function calls translate directly over to everything in JSX, but dang it, you're still putting HTML inside my JSX and I just can't have it. Well, firstly, calm down. Second of all, let's take a quick trip into our build pipeline here. Let's go ahead and you can follow along if you'd like. We'll do an npm run build here. This is one of our tasks, and whilst this is building, I'll just quickly say, if it's been a little bit confusing, if this is the first tutorial of this series that you've watched and going through that code was a little bit confusing, then I'd really invite you to start at tutorial 1 and work your way up to here, because I do explain what all this code is doing in the previous tutorials. This component in particular was built in the first tutorial, so you might want to have a look at that if anything that's happening here isn't clear. So now that that's built, let's head over into the dist, into the JavaScript file that you'll actually be delivering to your client's browser. And you'll see that there is a whole heap of stuff that Webpack puts in there to get all the common JS spec working and everything. We'll scroll down a little bit and we'll see our CodeQuest component here. And we'll look in the render function to find that JSX is... Oh! There is no JSX here. There is no HTML. So you can see where I'm going here, right? So basically, when the JSX gets transpiled by Webpack, by Babel, it ends up coming out as the same function calls as what you would have written and what we did in fact write earlier. This is formatted a little bit differently, but if you want to take the time to go and line all this up, you'll find that it is exactly the same as the function calls that we had previously. So allow me to wrap up with my final pitch to you about JSX. Now, I spent some time speaking with my good friend James Stoddart, and actually James runs the Cynical Developer Podcast, and I appeared on episode 3 of that and spoke to him about JSX and React, the wider React sort of ecosystem. I'll put a link there so you can go ahead and have a listen to that episode if you so wish. But James had some reservations, like a lot of other developers, about JSX and the way that it appeared to sort of cross-cut your concerns. Now, I've just shown you why that might not necessarily be a problem, in the fact that everything gets translated back out into function calls. I guess if you still don't feel okay about using JSX, what I would say is just give it 5 minutes. Read this article, it's excellent, entitled Give It 5 Minutes. Give it 5 minutes and just use it a little bit. Use JSX a little bit. Use it for a little while, and I think what you'll find is that you'll start writing components that you sort of forget about because you've written them for like wrote them a month or so ago, and then you come back to them and you'll have more of a chance of remembering what they did, because you'll be able to grok it a lot quicker because you're not going through all these nested function calls and making things really difficult for yourself in trying to understand what is this component trying to do for me. With JSX, you're able to look at it and it sort of makes sense because it's just HTML markup, or at least it looks like it's HTML markup. And you also see all your different components within that markup. You saw earlier that with the React DOM render that I was able to use the CodeQuest tag, and that represented a component. And as you start nesting components, and because you can do this in the render function of your components themselves, so you start nesting all your different components, and then you'll find that it's a lot simpler to understand. If I've got like a message box with a standard input and a couple of buttons, but the buttons are my own creation, the buttons might be sort of my own components, they'll be called Zac buttons or something, then I'll know, okay, that's a Zac button. I don't have to understand all of the implementation of a Zac button, but I do know that if I need more information, I can go to the Zac button and look at the implementation of it to be able to work out more about it. But you can see, even in that example, it's stripped away the complexity of the Zac button. And that makes things far more easier to understand and therefore easier to maintain. Because when you can reason about your code easier, you're able to maintain it easier. And you're going to find it hard to argue against me that maintainability is a bad thing to have. So what you're really talking about here is feeling uncomfortable about there being a lack of separation of concerns, which really, that's not entirely true, but let's say for the sake of argument that it is true that you've got a separation of concerns. Because even if you did have a separation of concerns, what you've got here is a development decision that you need to make, and we make many of these throughout our career. And the decision is: do I walk down this path that might appear to be slightly bad, but I get a lot of benefits for it? Or do I stick true to my development morals and to be damned with the consequences? And I think what you'll find is that the sensible decision is to take that, what appears to be a lack of separation of concerns, because you buy yourself so much maintainability and readability. So that's JSX. I hope you give it a try. So you've just completed the part 3 of the Code Venturing tutorial series. Give yourself a golf clap. I hope you had fun watching this video as much as I had making it. As usual, I'd really appreciate some feedback. Give me positive, give me a thumbs down, subscribe, do other things. Follow me on social media. Look, social media. And next time we're going to be talking about new spells, or the, most people call it ES6 or ES 2015. We're going to be introducing some new syntax into the application that we're building here. And so I'll see you next time. I've been Zac Braddy from the Reactionary.net. You've been you, and we've all been having fun together learning the ins and outs of React.js.
Let Zac Braddy show you how to learn the ins and outs of React now.